Hi everyone, welcome to today's webcast on how to succeed at your summer law job. We have 3 students here today to talk to you a little bit about their past summer experiences, and I'm going to turn it over to them, and if you could just briefly introduce yourselves and where you worked for your first 2 summers, that'd be great. Start with Liz.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Gocke. I'm a 3L. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In my first summer, I worked at a small office through the Law in London program in London with a firm called Withers, which is a larger firm, but the actual space where I worked was a little bit smaller. And for my second summer, I worked for a mid-sized firm called Thorpe Reed & Armstrong in their Philadelphia office, which is a satellite office of the larger office in Pittsburgh.
Great. Natalie.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalie Mitchell. I'm a 3L as well. I'm from upstate New York. My first summer I worked for Judge Peebles in his chambers downtown here in Syracuse. That's an office of about 4 or 5 people. In my second summer I worked for Cadwalader, Wickersham & Taft in their DC office, which is a firm of about 100 people in that office. It's much bigger in their main office in New York.
I'm Bobby Parelli. I'm from Southern New Jersey. My first summer, I worked at Legal Services of Central New York in downtown Syracuse, which is part of the New York State Protection Advocacy Unit for people with disabilities. And last summer, my 2L summer, I worked for the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund in Berkeley, California.
Great. Well, thanks for being here today. So basically, we're going to go through a variety of situations that students might face this summer. And starting with the first one, it's your first assignment. I'm sure you all remember it. I still remember mine. You're about to go meet with the assigning attorney. So talk a little bit about what you bring to the meeting and what are some questions that you ask. And Liz, let's start with you.
Okay, I'm thinking my first assignment wasn't actually an assignment, but I got in on the first day, and they told me I was going to go to bankruptcy court right then. And, you know, I had expected to wear a suit, so that was good. And that's the first thing I'd like to just say about assignments or the things that you're doing is you should always be prepared in terms of what to wear. So dress professionally every day, but I think it's really important to sort of nest in your office as much as you can. So, you know, keep a backup pair of pantyhose, a backup suit, a backup shirt in case you drop something on yourself. But in terms of what to bring, always, anytime I went to anyone's office, I always came with a pen and a full pad of paper. Even it was just to stop by to talk about social things, because things always pop up, and you don't want to be the person that says, "Oh, can I borrow your paper?" So I always came with something to write and something to write on. And then in terms of questions, ask as many questions as you have. Be thoughtful about your questions. You know, I think that some questions you can look up, like what's the statute of limitations? You can look that up. But in terms of how to do something, where to look, no one in my office ever minded when I asked additional questions. And for those people, I think when you ask the questions, they can tell that you're engaged and you're interested and that you're taking the assignment seriously. And that's important too, especially if you're not exactly sure what you're doing. So in terms of what questions, all of them.
Great. Natalie.
Yeah, I think Liz hit on some really good points. What I would add, I guess, is what I did this summer and found really helpful at the firm I worked at was once I left someone's office with the notes that they had given me and asked all the questions I could possibly think of, I always went back to my office and typed up those answers. Just, you know, it doesn't take long. It takes 10 minutes, and it really helps the organization because when you're writing like crazy, you know, and they're spewing out all this information about the case and they're really familiar with it, and you're kind of just coming up to speed for the first time, going back and trying to figure out what your chicken scratch says could be really difficult. So I think some helpful information that I always tried to get was if you're getting the assignment from a partner or a more senior person in your office, who else is working on the case? Because maybe the partner's not the person to ask, you know, really tiny questions to if, you know, they have a high demand for their time, and if there's an associate that you know better, it might be easier to just shoot them an email quick and see if they can fill you in on the information. So I would always kind of put all that information together. And then I think the general advice that Liz gave is great. The only other thing I would add for a firm, if you're working at it, is if they have you billing or putting in time information, you need to know what the number is associated with the case, and just ask them if there's any other sort of unique things about billing. You know, sometimes for a specific case, there's other codes that they need depending on what their system is. So.
No, I agree with what you've said. Mainly, it is so important to ask as many questions as possible. Even if you run out of questions, just start making them up. Because sometimes you really need to just put the assignment into context. And I know a couple times I've had assignments emailed to me that are so vague, and I've read them 20 times, and I still don't really know what they're looking for. It's because, they're busy, they're more senior, they're just throwing it out there. And in their head it makes sense, but to you it won't really make sense. So ask as many questions as possible. And even though I've only worked for public interest nonprofits, billing, the bill by hour is still really important. As 501c3 corporations, you have to keep time. So getting all that information, the codes and things like that is still important. But it is a little more informal. I've never had to keep extra pantyhose around. But, so I feel a lot more comfortable in public interest settings just going up to someone and asking them a question in their face, whereas, I've worked in big firms, and that's been a little more, apprehensive to do something like that. So, but either way, no matter what context, you have to ask as many questions as possible.
What Natalie said about billing reminded me specifically the billing number, the client number, but then also, the specific things we were talking about. Sometimes clients won't pay for Westlaw or Lexis, so It's really important to know that off the bat so that you're not, spending 3 hours on Westlaw and then you can't bill it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's always great to ask those types of questions. For example, how long would you like me to spend on this assignment? Because obviously you have those parameters. Some certain clients, not only will they not pay for Lexis or Westlaw, but they might only expect a certain amount of time be spent. So all really great tips and advice. One other additional thing might be, and I know typically when I was working as a summer associate in my positions, typically a lot of memos, but obviously asking, because sometimes I found that when I went back, they were like, oh, just send me a quick email, because I'm just going to put it right into, what I'm working on. So definitely the type of the asking, how would you like me to convey this information is always really helpful as well. So now you've handed in that assignment, that first assignment, and the assigning attorney comes by and has a question, and you're not really sure what the answer is. So what do? What are some tips and strategies to help you navigate that situation? Let's start with Natalie this time.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, never make up the answer if you don't know it, or sort of pretend that you saw it in your research or something, because that I can't see that going well in any situation, because chances are you don't know the answer, and that's okay. So I think it's fine to just be kind of upfront and honest about the fact that you don't know it, and explain to them, I didn't see that or haven't come across that yet, but I'm more than happy to look it up. I'm working on something right now, but I might be able to get to it this afternoon, or sort of feel out what their deadline is and kind of let them give you feedback on when they were hoping to find the information. So I think it's fine to sort of own up to the fact that you don't know it. They know you're law students, and in most situations, your supervisor's been in your shoes before too. So while it's intimidating and scary, I think that you'll sort of find as your summer goes on that they're more understanding of your position than you think that they are. Just something else that I was thinking of too, but before you hand in your first assignment, a great option for you is to have someone look it over. In a smaller office, you might have kind of a more informal mentor setting, but in a larger office, or like at my firm this summer, we had structured mentors that were provided to us in different practice groups that we were working in. So I would ask them a lot to read over my stuff, and they might know something about the person that I was handing it into that I didn't, and they would suggest just little things, that can go a long way, though, in your presentation. And even amongst my summer associate class, sometimes I would have my fellow classmates read things over just for typos and whether it made sense, and they could provide great feedback. So I would encourage that, too.
That's great. Bobby, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sometimes no matter how comprehensive you think you were in a memo, there may still be loose ends that you didn't even think of. So just be open and honest. I've never had a situation where I told them I didn't know or that I needed more time where they weren't absolutely okay with it.
I would just stress again how important it is to be honest about mistakes or not knowing something. Natalie's totally on the ball here because, I worked with one partner quite often who would keep coming back for more information. He'd say, well, did you see this? Did you see this? And if I said yes, that puts me in a tight spot because I'm making up things. But they really do, I think, respect when you say, no, I didn't. I can look into that now. When do you want that back? And just being really upfront about what you didn't look at, but also offering to provide that information, whenever it's possible for you to do that time-wise. I think people really appreciate that, and I mean, you won't get in trouble for not knowing something, so long as you're honest about it.
Right, and it's kind of twofold here in terms of basically what Natalie was talking about, where you should try to get a sense after an assignment of who you're working for, and your mentors can provide that. So if they're like, be prepared, that partner's going to come in with follow-up questions, or be prepared, that partner doesn't like when you cut and paste from your email and it makes all the formatting weird. As you guys know, every professor expects something different in terms of your exams here at law school, and the same can be said when you're actually in practice, that every partner, every attorney is going to expect something different. So definitely knowing who you're dealing with, and obviously being very straightforward is very important.
I would just like to say, I think that that's totally true, and taking any source you can find for that extra information is really important. And other great sources to figure out what people are expecting or what they want are the secretaries and the paralegals and the librarians. And I think that's not sort of, or maybe it's this later, but those people can be really, really useful to providing insight and just helping you.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the support staff a little bit further. You found that they were very helpful in terms of resources. What other tips and strategies for dealing with everybody else besides the attorney that you're working for? If you want to elaborate a little further, Liz.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main point with support staff and librarians, paralegals, secretaries is to be super respectful. I know for me, I came straight out of undergrad, and I think you did too. I'm not sure, Rob. Did you?
No, I worked before.
Okay.
But I'll talk about it because I have some good stories about this.
But so I know that I always felt very conscious of how young I was, especially compared to the support staff in the office. And I think because of that age difference, I don't know if you felt this way, but it's really important to make sure that you're super respectful of those people, because they do have great knowledge, and it can be a little weird with the age differences sometimes. But those people are so helpful. So I think some of the things are, when you have questions that you feel like are silly questions, go to those people first. You can be really endearing, and I developed really nice relationships with the support staff. So they were always willing to help me, and if they couldn't help me, they would point me to an attorney who might be more accessible in terms of asking questions to, or who had more time, or who was more knowledgeable. The librarians especially were great for that, because the librarians are working every day with those attorneys. So they know, well, that attorney, maybe is sometimes obtuse about things, but this is where you should go, or these are my suggestions. And so, I mean, those people are invaluable. And I know that everyone talks about support staff a lot, but I just feel like it's so important. And then, at the end of the summer to, especially if you're at a law firm, I think, and you have a personal secretary, it's not only yours, but who you're working with closely, to give them a small gift, flowers, or, like a coffee gift card or something that they're interested in, because, they're not used to having an extra person around to do billing hours for, or copying, or things like that, and to just sort of show your appreciation for how helpful that person was to you.
That's great. Great advice. Bob, you said you had some thoughts.
Yeah, no, so I'm in a unique position where, so before law school I was a teacher, and I came here because I wanted to do special ed law. So every place I've worked at, both my summers, specialize in education law. So we've had not only a legal wing, but we have parent advocates that are experts in the law, but they don't happen to be lawyers. So, I do not treat them any different as I would a lawyer, but a lot of times what I've noticed, even though I'm younger than them and I'm still a student, they'll preface things by saying, okay, I'm not a lawyer, but, and I tell them, don't even say that. Like, you are an encyclopedia on this topic. I look up to you, and I don't think there should be any difference in the way you treat them. And also, I know I've had a professor here told me a really good story. He said that when you're interacting with support staff, you should always treat them with respect, obviously. But he said when they have law students come in for interviews, the first person he goes to for feedback is the receptionist. How did he treat you? How did he or she treat you? How did they address you? Because if there was a poor experience, they'll just throw their application out right there. So that's so important.
Oh, it's very true. I think actually my second summer position I partially got because I had such a good relationship with the receptionist while I was waiting. I just happened to start talking to her, and she was a former kindergarten teacher, and I had student taught in kindergarten, and so we had a nice conversation, and it was funny because when I did start, the HR person was, well, you know who your biggest fan was? And they had actually talked to, so it's absolutely true that everybody that you come into contact, whether it's, you know, the couriers who bring stuff over to court, you know, you should always be nice and friendly and smile and say hi and acknowledge them, just the smallest of things. It's important. Natalie, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I would just echo what they said. They're absolutely right. And I, can't say enough wonderful things about the support staff at both jobs that I worked at over my summer. They're tremendously helpful, and they think of things that you don't think of either. So, this summer I was helping a partner at the firm put together a presentation for everyone else at the firm, and we needed to put together a packet. And I put it all together and brought it up to my secretary and thought I had done everything that I needed to do. And she was like, well, what about this and what about this? And I hadn't thought of any of it and was like, oh, okay, I'll figure that out, So she really helped me bring it together under a time crunch, and she, was helpful throughout the summer. And I don't know how it works at other firms, but she volunteered to help the summers. So like Liz said, they sort of have their normal group of attorneys that they help, and you're an additional person that they're taking on just kind of out of the goodness of their heart. So it's really important, to just echo that you really appreciate them doing that, because I couldn't have done it without her. So
I had a question for you, sort of specifically though, about the support staff. One of the things that I feel like I really struggled with was how to utilize them, just because you're not aware going in as a summer, what they might be capable of doing, just because you don't have that knowledge. So how did you utilize your secretary?
I guess I knew summer associates that did it differently, and I think a great office to reach out to if you're at a firm or really anywhere about how to utilize your support staff, and what is kind of okay to ask them to help with, and what you feel like is crossing the line, is HR sort of gave us a rundown of these are the things that they typically do for people. So I used her for special projects like that. If I had questions or was unsure how to communicate with a specific office, she did reimbursement filings for me. So if we traveled, or had to go somewhere and we had expenses, I went through her for that. I know some people used them for their timesheets, so they might, record their time as they went through the day and hand it to their secretary as they left or something. But I did that on my own, just because, I might sometimes be there past after she was gone, and I didn't want to kind of leave it on her desk as something else she had to do when she came in the morning. So, and I thought it was kind of a good thing for me to learn how to do by myself anyway. So I think it's different, but I think HR can really tell you what's typical for your office, too.
Do you have any thoughts?
No.
About using the support staff at all, or? Yeah,
I have experiences, like you said, where kind of you create this relationship with them outside of the scope of employment, just talking to them about their lives or their kids. And but yeah, I do agree with what both of you said. Going to them first, and they have much more experience with the particular attorney, how they like something. Liz, you earlier mentioned how formatting. I've had lawyers who will send me a document with track changes and just read all over it, and I've had other attorneys who want a clean paper, will not even look at it if there's track changes, and those are things that support staff could tell you from experience. So that's really good to ask.
And that's the thing, you want to have a good relationship with them because they can make you look good. Yeah. That was even as a young associate. Once I started, they're the ones that they can. If you have a good relationship with them, they will make you look good. But if they kind of think you're then they might just let something kind of slide. You know what I mean? Just because that's not my job. And so I think it's really great advice to establish a good relationship with them. So another popular, especially being a summer, everybody gets excited that the summers are here and we have lots of assignments for everybody. So and I'm sure you all face this at some point, what do you do when you have kind of two assignments due at the same time, or they come into your office and you're working on something that's time sensitive, but they need their assignment ASAP, how can you navigate that situation? And Bobby, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. I've had a recent example where I had two things. I planned to work on them, finish one, and then start the next, but the first one was taking much longer than I thought. So once I realized it, I sent an email out saying, I understand you need this by this time, but it's much more involved than I originally thought. Is it okay to have an extension? And I've never had a time where they said no, and they're usually very understanding. But that happens a lot. And I think the key is to catch it early and to tell them that you need more time. And that way you can work it out. Don't tell them at the last minute. Don't tell them at the due date, because that's going to cause some problems.
That's great advice. Natalie?
Yeah, I think that's really the key to it, is if you think you're going to miss a deadline, you need to tell your supervisor, like, as soon as you know, or even, like, possibly thinking that you're going to miss it. So, if you give them a heads up, hey, I'm not sure I'm going to have this by 2, it might be the end of the day, and you can get it to them by 2, great. But if you can't, you sort of offered that protection for yourself, and it's not 2 o'clock and they're emailing you at 2:30 saying, where is that? It looks much, much worse if they're asking you where it is than if you tell them up front. And I think, part of it you have to think about is the nature of the assignment. So if you have 2 assignments and one of them's taking longer and you're not going to get to the next one, is the next one like for an attorney who has a motion due, and it needs to be to the court by a certain time? Or if, like I was working for the judge this summer, is it something that I know he needs because the case is coming in tomorrow for a hearing, and he needs the information while he's on the bench? Then obviously that needs to be done first. And I think what you just kind of explained when you're asking, for the extension without going into too much detail about it, is I think you can just be upfront and honest and say, I have this other assignment that someone's asked me to do that's due at this point, and then they can understand, and it's not just you're asking for an extension because you went to lunch and it took longer than you thought or something like that. And I think that people really are understanding for the most part about that. And even in situations where someone's asked me to do something and it was kind of a tight turnaround, if I had lunch scheduled with an associate or a partner or something, I just said, I'm more than happy to cancel my lunch. I just wanted to let you know I was planning on going out today. Are you okay with that? And most of the time they say, yeah, that's fine. We want you to be able to go to lunch and talk to the people at the firm and sort of learn about aspects of the firm, and you can do this when you get back.
I was the only summer in my office, and we had about 20 people, I guess, or 20 attorneys. And so there was always a ton of work for me, and I feel like this happened all the time. And I was really lucky because we had a really formal, mentor and supervisor relationship. Mm-hmm. So all my assignments had to go through my supervisor, and if I had an issue where I couldn't get something done, I went to him first and said, these are the assignments that I have. What do you think I should do? And he was always really helpful at saying, I can talk to that person, or this is a person who I think you should speak to that person directly. And so Natalie's totally right, and Rob's totally right. As soon as you know that you're not going to be able to finish both things, you need to go and have that discussion and say, is it possible to get an extension? Mm-hmm. These are the barriers that I've encountered that have made this timing an issue. But that said, I think that when you have 2 assignments due tomorrow, you also just need to do everything you can to finish both of them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means staying really late. Sometimes that means bringing work home. But that's sort of the nature of this profession. And those are things that as associates or, as lawyers, everyone's going to encounter these things, whether you're at a firm or you're in private practice. There's always a lot of work, and sometimes you need to just put in the extra effort and put in the extra time. And so absolutely, if you can't finish something, or if you can't finish 2 assignments, you need to be honest about that. But if you can't finish 2 assignments because you're leaving at 6:30, that's sort of a different issue. And so I think it's just important to finish them.
Absolutely.
When you can.
Yeah, Sam, I would just add to that, and this is, probably true for anything you do in life, including school, but like Liz is saying, if you have 2 assignments, you do need to, do what you can to get them done. And I think that sort of a bad habit to get into is saying, oh, it's due at 2 o'clock tomorrow, so I'll finish it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I think if you have 2 assignments due tomorrow, having them done before you leave the night before should always be your goal, because if somebody calls you at 9:30 the next morning and says, hey, can you come up to my office really quick? I have something I want you to do. You want to be able to say yes. And you're not going to be able to if you have 2 assignments due at 2 o'clock. So I think that always trying to get them done the night before and, maybe a quick read through the next day is your ideal goal. That said, that's not always going to be able to happen. Right. But like Liz is saying, if you have 2 assignments due at 2 the next day and they're not done at 6 o'clock when you might normally leave the office, then you should plan on staying, to get them in good shape. So,
absolutely. That's great advice. Moving on to sort of a ethical question. So you're out at lunch, talking with a few junior attorneys, and one of them asked you, hey, what cases are you working on? What do you suggest that students cover or talk about? Anybody wants to start?
Do you want to start?
Sure, I can. I think that you just have to keep in mind what you learned in your professional responsibility class. We take that class for a reason, and it's ABA mandated for a reason. You can obviously need to be somewhat responsive to the question without just being like, oh, I don't want to talk about that, and freezing. But you can do it sort of in a general way, so you might just say, oh, I'm working on a case with this practice group with this partner or something, and chances are they're not going to press you too much more for the details. It's just kind of a general question to get the conversation started, especially if you don't know the people that well. So, obviously, they tell you in class, refrain from using party names, any additional details, because it's just, you're in a public setting. And that goes for, the elevators in your building, too.
Absolutely.
I think, that tends to happen a lot, especially if your office or firm kind of has a large share of the building. So in my office in DC, it's relatively new, and the firm took up the majority of the floors, but there was some smaller offices, and other people are now moving in as it kind of fills up. So a lot of times you'd walk in and it would just be people from the firm in the office, but sometimes you'd walk in and you don't recognize the person standing in the corner, so you just have to be aware of your surroundings and what you're talking about with people, because you could very well get onto the elevator with a partner who says, hey, you're working on that case, how's it going? And you obviously need to be responsive but cognizant of what's going on around you.
Absolutely. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing we learned in professional responsibility is that you always have to be vigilant. You always have to remember the rules. When you're at lunch, cases and things is going to come up. You'll discuss it, but you have to keep it general. You have to, not share any privileged information or anything like that. I know that for me, a lot of times when we work with clients, we have to keep everything on the documents, the motions, everything confidential. So I just remember poring over a document, making sure that we had just initials, just in case, because when a document goes through so many hands, every time you might slip and put the person's name. Right. So these are, confidentiality is such a key aspect of any summer job. So it's just important to keep those fresh in mind at all times.
Any other ethical issues that you've ever come across or anything else you want to add?
I would just add, I've definitely heard stories from people where, people at a firm will intentionally ask questions like this just to see sort of how you'll deal with it. Like, will you talk about confidential information in public? And so one of the things you can do if you're sort of unsure is to just say, oh, is it okay to talk about that in this setting? Mm-hmm. And then you're sort of signaling that that there might be an issue there, but maybe it is okay in certain contexts. And I would just say one of the other things that I found with these questions was I feel like whenever someone would ask me, oh, what are the things you would work on, suddenly it would all leave my mind and I couldn't remember anything I'd been working on. So we would keep files of all the projects we were working on, and especially if I had a lunch or something, I would always sort of review my file to just remind myself all the things I'd been working on, so I could sort of speak knowledgeably about those projects, being conscious of the confidentiality issues and not, saying names and things like that.
And the same goes with family and friends, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes that can be, especially if you have family and friends who don't quite understand exactly what you're doing, that it can be kind of difficult to sort of, bob and weave and just kind of give them enough to let them, know, okay, I'm working on a torts case or something like that. So definitely good to be vigilant. Any other ethical issues that you guys can think of, or is that kind of the main one that a summer associate would?
Well, I just want to add that not only is knowing the rules important for you, but something I've struggled with that I think is a skill that I've had to learn is telling your clients about the rules. So when you're, especially for me, I've had clients with developmental disabilities, and there's always explaining the forms, making the forms in plain language. This is the rules. We now have an attorney-client relationship. These are the rules in confidentiality. So not only knowing the rules for yourself, but being able to put them in plain language and explain to your client what the rules are and just the parameters of your relationship, which is really hard. I've had clients to stop me and say, "I'm really confused. You need to back up." And so I've had to kind of relearn the language I learned in the professional responsibility class to kind of, translate that, because it's not really helpful for people who aren't lawyers a lot.
That's coming from somebody who was a teacher. So, it's difficult.
Yeah, I thought I was good at that, explaining things, but apparently I had a long way to go. So.
Well, great. Let's move on. So, and this I think is probably one of the biggest questions you see, and I think people pretty much know to avoid it, but let's talk about the social aspect of your summer employment. We can talk about it on a variety of levels, but let's start with the busy work week. And you're tired, you stayed late all week to get those projects done, and you just want to go home. It's your first chance to go. How important is it that you attend a social event that maybe the office has put together, or that somebody from the office has invited you to? And what are some just do's and don'ts for attending social functions? Liz, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I had sort of a different experience with this because I was the only summer in our office. But even though I was the only summer, they still did a pretty extensive, social event calendar, and usually at least 1 or 2 events per week. So the issue with that, though, is that if I didn't go,
you were the only one.
So people would notice. So I went to everything, but also we had some events throughout the summer that were office-wide events. So there was a bowling party at the end of the summer, and there were a couple of Phillies games with clients and things like that. And so with those things, again, if you have an assignment that you need to finish, that's your top priority. But to the extent that you can attend that, and maybe you have to cancel something that you had for your own social calendar, it's really important to go to those events. Because going to those events, you have an opportunity to speak with people in a more casual setting. They're going to ask you about you personally, and you get to sort of share a bit about yourself, I think. And people really like that. People, especially lawyers, they're going in every day, they're working really hard, they're dealing with all of these clients and cases, and it's sort of overwhelming. But I think they really enjoy speaking to young attorneys and law students who are still really excited about the profession. And so it's enjoyable for them, but it's also important for your professional career. Socializing is a big part of networking, and it's good to start getting practice, in your summer.
Absolutely. Natalie.
Yeah, I would echo what Liz said. I didn't have, a huge summer class like some of them that you see in New York. There was 9 of us, though. And so even kind of on that level, if someone wasn't at an event, it could be apparent, and the firm understands that you can't make it to necessarily everything. There might be, a weekend that you have a wedding and you're going out of town, and so the Thursday night social you're not going to make. And I think any employer would understand that, but that said, I think you need to make the effort every single time to be there, even if it's a long work week, even if you wanted to go out to dinner with your friends that night. Your summer at your job is, your top priority, I think, all the time. And if you do that and you go to those events, I think that you'll see that opportunities come from it, too. So a lot of times if you're really hoping to work with one person, you haven't had a chance yet, and they're at the event and you get to speak to them, then maybe you can get an assignment from them, or if you've really been hoping to go to lunch with someone to pick their brain about something and they're at the event, that's sort of an awesome opportunity that you wouldn't want to pass up. Just because it's been a long week and you'd really like to go home and go to bed. It's, kind of one of those things that in the end it'll pay off and you'll feel better about it for having attended, I think.
Absolutely.
And they're really fun. Most of the time. Our firm did a great job of putting together some really, really fun events that also help your associate class, I think, too, at firms kind of come together and be friends, which it just sort of all compounds on itself, so then you feel more comfortable going to them and saying, hey, can you proofread this, or you feel more comfortable saying, I know you worked with this partner before, what did they say about this, or you feel more comfortable doing anything, really, sort of around them or the other associates and people at your firm. And I think the ultimate goal is to kind of achieve a level of comfort and fluidity in your job by the end of the summer, and that's only going to help. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. It's important to attend. I mean, there's been times where I left early because I was really tired, but it's a great opportunity to get to know people outside of work and, pick their brain and learn their backstories. Why do they do what they do? I mean, that's part of the reason, why we have summer jobs is not only to learn skills, but to meet people who were once in our shoes. And just get advice from them on every aspect of law school. So I've, have great relationships with people I work with, but some of those relationships started, outside of work. So I would make every attempt to attend, but don't feel bad if you have to leave early or something.
Does anybody have any horror stories? I mean, I know you were the only summer at your particular office, but maybe you've heard some stories about people kind of acting inappropriately during social events in ways that, like, obviously you read in the media the sort of extreme inappropriateness, but even just anything subtle or anything, stories.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because I just wanted to talk about the drinking aspect. I had a friend who was at a really big firm in New York, and they had one of those huge summer classes. And even at my firm, though, and I assume at yours too, like, drinking ends up being a big aspect of these social programs. So whether it's like a happy hour, you're at a bar, or like people just have drinks, we did a wine tasting. And so there's sort of competing pressures there because you want to fit in, you want to have a drink. If it's a wine tasting, you want to, go along to get along. But there's also the issue of, how much do you drink? What are people going to say about you? What drink do you order? Even that, I think, shows something. And so, I think definitely if you're someone that doesn't drink, you shouldn't feel pressure to start drinking. But, you do have to sort of participate in what's happening, but being mindful of your own tolerance of alcohol and your own behavior. My mom always says don't have more than 2 drinks, and sometimes that's not possible just because of the nature of the events and what you're doing, but it is really important to limit yourself and to not be crazy. At the end of the day, it's a work party, and maybe that's an oxymoron, but first of all, it's work. It's not, fun time. And
right.
So you can really embarrass yourself, I think, by drinking too much or, being too crazy. These people at the end of the day are your colleagues, not your friends.
Absolutely.
I would agree with Liz. I think there's, I think you hear about it in the sort of a summer associate event kind of session a lot, and there's always like these legendary stories, like somebody 5 years ago did this, and in that office we heard about, or you hear it through your friends.
Yeah.
I heard that this happened, and it sounds crazy, and I think sometimes they're a little blown out of proportion. But she's absolutely right that you kind of have to know your own limits and just be very cognizant of it, because you don't want to be the person that, for the rest of the summer is like, I did that one night and I really hope it doesn't impact, my ability to get an offer or, what they think of me. You don't kind of want that to be your lasting impression on everyone, so.
Can I also just say, this wasn't an issue for me because I was the only summer at my firm, but at a place, whether it's a law firm or public practice, and you're working with other people your age, there's a tendency for relationships to start, and especially when you're a summer or when you're an intern, that's a bad idea, and you just need to avoid that and not participate in that, because I also heard horror stories about that, and it's just, it sort of ruins your own credibility.
Absolutely. Any stories or any?
I don't have any personal experiences, but I've worked at big firms where there are stories that get around. So even if they aren't true, if you're connected with the story, you just want to avoid that.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously, sometimes it's easy because some of the other attorneys have had a lot to drink, and you don't want to get lulled into that sort of false sense of security, like, hey, they're doing it, it's okay. Yeah. Or even, and so sometimes things come out of their mouths that are inappropriate, and they shouldn't. So don't kind of play into, I've been in situations where I've been in a crowd and I'm like, oh no, don't, because somebody else, a partner or an associate, unfortunately, starts using profanity or just something like that. You just don't want to. You need to kind of stick towards being, very conservative about everything and not get lulled into anything else that maybe might be going on around you that you might not see. Okay, well, I'm not drinking too much, but I'm going to just, curse like a trucker, like, that, there's just certain things that, don't get sort of lulled into. And I think it's kind of common sense, but it's easy. Once you've had a few drinks, the inhibition kind of starts to drop. So it's important to kind of be aware of, it's not necessarily just, falling down the stairs and flashing everybody, that it can be the, the swearing or saying something. No, but I've heard I've heard stories of people having to be escorted back because it often happens on retreats.
Yeah.
And having to be escorted back, and inappropriate things start coming out of people's mouths and happening as they're being escorted back to their rooms. So, it's definitely, the big ones don't drink too much, but it's also just be careful and be cognizant that, what you say isn't going to be misconstrued and everything like that.
That's true, especially just because I feel like as a summer or as an intern, you're not necessarily aware of all the underlying politics that are going on. And so when something like that comes out of someone's mouth, it's so easy to agree with them, but you don't actually know what the backstory is.
Right.
And there could be a lot of history there.
Absolutely. So one of the last situations before we start wrapping things up, what do you do when you're just kind of not happy about something? Whether it can be like you're not happy about the assignments that you're getting, or, you perceive something else, maybe one of the other summers, although, Liz, I know you were the only summer, but perceiving like somebody else, gets to go to lunch a lot more, just anything in general when you're just kind of generally unhappy about something. Bobby, can you talk a little bit about what you should do?
Sure. I mean, I have a really specific example. We had a really high-profile case. And we're a small office. I wanted to work on it, but they gave out the summer assignments randomly, so I didn't get it. And, I was pretty bummed at first. But what I did was, I regret kind of sulking to myself, but I had another project. I kind of took it and ran with it. It was an area that I was unfamiliar with, whereas the other case I was very familiar with, So the other case that I did have, it involved a lot of traveling. I got to meet a lot of clients, and I really ran with it, and I had a great time. And what happened was, my work really stood out that eventually I was put on the other case anyway because they needed people. So it all worked out, and I'm still embarrassed that I was upset about it. So my lesson that I got from that is no matter what you have, no matter what case, even if you weren't happy with it, you have to do your best. And eventually, if you're good, you'll stand out anyway.
That's great. Natalie?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that what you kind of have to recognize, I think it's really easy to slip into, like you said, the sort of feeling like, oh, like, that sounds so cool, and it's like really natural for a person to feel that way. And you're going to talk about the assignments that you're working on with the other summer associates, and you want to kind of hear what they're doing in their cases and stuff. So I think it's definitely like a natural reaction to feel like that, but you have to recognize too that over the course of the summer there's going to be so many opportunities to work on stuff that chances are down the line you're going to get to work on some great stuff. So I really, really enjoyed everything that I worked on at my firm, and I really enjoyed everything I worked on with Judge Peebles my 1L summer. And in both situations there were other people in the office, other interns or summer associates that had really great opportunities as well. So I don't think that it's something that you should sort of worry about too much in the long run, because it all, I feel like, sort of evens out. And like you were saying, if you put in the work and make a good impression on the cases that you do have, you're just going to get further opportunities, that will be interesting and rewarding, and that you'll find, to be really great experiences.
I think anywhere you work, there's this sort of period during which you have to prove yourself. And prove that you're going to have a good work product, that you're going to turn it in on time, that you're going to be thoughtful and sort of go beyond. And so at the beginning stage, you might be a little bit bored because maybe you're not getting the favorite assignment that you wanted to get. Right. But it's really important at that time to work really hard and to perform really well with that. I know one of the things I did worry about, though, was because we did have 2 summers in the bigger office, I often worried about, being compared to them. Was I getting the same sort of assignments? How would they look compared to me? Not that you're in competition with each other, but, you don't want this whole, a huge disparity in work product and in what sort of assignments you're getting. But also for me, I worked really hard at the beginning to make sure that that my assignments were really good. And then about halfway through the summer, things were really busy and everyone was out of the office for an event somewhere else. And they got a huge client. It was really time sensitive, and I was there. And so I ended up getting to take a really a really good sort of position as the point person on this assignment that lasted several weeks. But I wouldn't have gotten that assignment the first day. And I think it's important to recognize that you do need to show that you're capable before you do that. It can be really frustrating being young and, I can do this. Like, why don't these people believe me? So sometimes maybe you have to look internally and say, how can I show a better idea of my capabilities so that people see that and are willing to give me that work product and sort of just instead of like getting down on yourself. But I mean, everyone does feel that way. So
yeah, absolutely. So I think the underlying sort of theme is to always be positive. Like you don't want to go complaining. You don't want to be sort of seen as that. You need to take it and kind of turn it into a positive, and hopefully things will kind of right themselves and you'll end up getting that assignment that you want. But the biggest thing too is just to never talk like negatively. Maybe you met the other summers and you were just like, you never want to badmouth anybody or anything, the school, anybody you worked with, even if somebody's like, oh yeah, and it's like those social the social setting where they're kind of like, they say something kind of negative just to see, if you'll play into it, but you always need to be positive about everything. So now I just kind of want to turn and as we wrap things up, kind of talk a little bit about maybe like your personal takeaway that you think that, maybe when going into your summer job, you didn't think, wow, that's what I would take away, that you can maybe offer as a piece of advice to our students.
I would say the biggest thing about my summer was just working really hard and always, trying to do the best that I could do. And so that tied into a lot of things. That tied into being respectful of the support staff, making sure that I asked all the questions I had, that if I had more questions, I came back later, staying really late, doing all of these things. And so for me, that was great because I ended up developing really good relationships with people in the office. And now, obviously I'm in school and I'm waiting to go back in the fall. But, they'll periodically call me, let me know what's going on. There's been some changes in the office recently. But because I've had these close relationships with people, they've made sure to keep me aware of things and to discuss them with me and to, did I have questions? How did I feel about that? And that's because, I went through that period of proving myself and of working really hard. And people respect that. People are appreciative, and they don't expect you as, a 24-year-old, just finished your second year of law school to know everything, but they expect you to make an effort. And everyone can try hard. You don't have to, have some innate ability or some past knowledge. You can make the effort to learn things. One of the things you can do there, too, is you can preserve your Westlaw and Lexis access for the summer. I think Lexis, you can even actually use it now for the firm. I know in the past that's been another ethical issue. But so if you have questions, if you want to learn about things throughout the summer, when you go home, do some extra research so you have some background knowledge about what's going on. And that's not really an ethical issue because it's not for the firm's work product, but you're still educating yourself and you'll be more knowledgeable. So, just working really hard, I think you do get, a lot of payback for that. And I feel really proud of my summer and of the relationships I built. So I'm, excited for my future career.
That's great. Natalie?
I think the one thing that I took away from this summer, and I think is really important, to keep in mind generally in life, but in your work experiences too, is to be open to new things. So I think, like Liz was saying, after you finished your second year, you've been in law school for 2 years, I guess, but you've taken, the standard 1L classes, and then 2L year, you're still kind of taking those requirement classes, and haven't had a chance to take a lot of electives or specialize in a certain area. And for some students, they come into law school and they know exactly what they want to do, and that's great, and they can go into a more specialized field their 2L summer or work in a more specialized place. But I don't think that's true for a lot of law students. They haven't had exposure to a lot of different things, and I certainly didn't know this is exactly what I wanted to do when I went into my 1L job or my 2L job. And I think at the firm I got a chance to work in a lot of different practice groups, and I'm going to be returning to the firm in the fall and working for their energy and commodities group, and I'm really excited about it, and I loved the group when I was there this summer. But that said, when I first started getting assignments from them, I hadn't taken a class in, energy law or anything about commodities, and I was really nervous to go into, a partner or even an associate's office for the first time and talk to them about it, because there's all these terms that, like, I'm not 100% sure what that means, and I'm not really clear on what happens. And that said, everyone at the office, recognized that and was very patient and willing to walk me through things once, twice, a third time if I still needed it, ask a bunch of questions, and they don't expect you to know all the answers, but sort of being open to trying that and just sort of diving in and figuring it out and coming up to speed on it, I think gave me a really great experience, and I ended up loving it. It was my first ranked group when I left the firm, and I was really, really thrilled to get an offer from them. So I think if you hadn't been open to that opportunity, it would have been an opportunity missed for me, and that would have been really disappointing. So I think you just kind of have to keep that in mind, that maybe you didn't specialize in it in school, and maybe there's not a class you can take on it, but there's so many things that you can learn outside the classroom. I think you'll hear that kind of over and over again at your jobs too, is that so much of it just involves just working on a case and diving in, and maybe it takes me a little longer, and maybe I have to read more background material, but towards the end of the summer, I was like, okay, I'm keeping up with this conversation, Right. So the only other thing I would add, and this is geared towards the job that you're going into, but if anyone's out there that doesn't have a job yet, or is still, planning on looking for a job when they come back their 3L year, I can't say enough about the alumni that Syracuse University has. And what they're willing to do for current students. I've heard great stories from all of my friends about it, and my personal experience with them has been fantastic. I don't think that people necessarily consider that as an option right away. They just sort of look for job postings out there and apply. But I think that Syracuse University alumni are extremely, extremely willing to help, and even if they can't help you directly, you can talk to them and they can give you tips, and they might know somebody that they would encourage you reaching out to. So I would really, really encourage that as a resource.
That's great. So from the public sector side, I know you have some thoughts about the importance of at least your second summer, right, Bobby?
Yeah, no, I have a couple points, and we're on the same wavelength. I just think that, like Natalie, when I think of summer jobs, I think of what can I learn or what skills can I hone that I'm not getting in the classroom. And for me, in public interest, most important skill that I've learned is client interaction, and that's what's I think is unique to public interest, that you talk to clients in person or over the phone every day. And intake is a skill that you really need to learn. And in terms of law school, it's why I recommend people do a clinic, because intake is a skill. Knowing what questions to ask is an absolute skill that I feel like they should teach you more in the classroom. But that's what I've learned. You will do an intake. You will take pages and pages of notes, and then you'll go to a lawyer and bring them the notes, and they'll ask you a question immediately that you didn't even think of. And so it's really important to hone those skills. And then my second point was, like you alluded to, is that the best advice I ever got was that when I was trying to find a placement for my second year, a lawyer I used to work for said, your second year is the most important summer for your career. So you should pick a placement that will somehow further your career, whether it's you think you know what area of law you want to practice, do a job there. If you think you know what geographic area you want to practice in, go there. You have to start making connections. You can't just, pick any job you find. You have to start strategically, getting everything in order. And so that's what I really ran with that. And I knew public interest, I wanted to go the fellowship route. So that's why I picked a place that I felt I really respected, had a great name. And, when I applied, I told them I was interested in looking for a fellowship. And that was how I kind of formed a relationship with them. And I think that my client interaction was one of the reasons why they wanted to keep me on. So I think, to tie it all together neatly, that you really need to learn those skills in public interest.
That's a great point. It sounds like you really told them what you wanted and asked for what you were interested in, and you had to think about that beforehand. Right,
and I think that I'm lucky in the sense that I knew exactly what I wanted the day I stepped foot here. So I kind of had a 3-year plan, which makes me sound like a nerd.
You need plans.
Yeah.
Plans are good.
Yeah, and so I feel...
We like plans.
Yeah. It's type A personality.
Yeah, I mean, I just have a lot of friends who are in their 3rd year and still don't really know what they want, and that happens, but I think that your second year is when you really need to start making moves. And I think that if I could give advice to people who want to do public interest, there's so many resources out there, like pslawnet.org. This is just an amazing website that kind of brings this network of organizations together, and they have calls for fellowships, job applications, and it's really great website, and I've used it.
It's actually called PSJD now. They changed it
Oh,
over.
I saw that, but you know,
Yes, in
I still
July.
I still do the same HTML, and they redirect me.
They
so I
do
refuse.
redirect you, and they keep all your login and everything, so
They
you don't
do.
have to create a new account. But yes, it's a wonderful,
I don't
wonderful
like change.
site.
No. Yeah, it's great, and I think that if you're looking the fellowship route, organizations post fellowship, they request fellowship applications, and that's a great way. Like you said, just be honest with them what I'm looking for. You know.
And the
So
thing
that
with
people know how to help you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the thing with the public service, too, for those of you who might be listening and talking and interested in a public sector route, with the fellowship application process, a lot of them, it's early in your third year, like September,
Oh, yeah.
October, for two of the major fellowship proposals. That's when they're due of your third year. So that's why your second summer becomes so important, because you work on this project proposal all summer long. So that's why, in addition to all the great reasons, that your second summer is really important. Does anybody have any final thoughts, or do you think we covered them all?
I think we covered it all.
All right.
Good.
Well, thanks so much for being here. And for those of you watching, if you have any additional questions that kind of came up in your mind after watching this, please don't hesitate to stop into the professional development office and set up a time with a counselor. We're always happy to talk you through any worries that you might have about your upcoming summer. Thanks so much for watching.
Good luck.
Thanks.